Major Sarah Chin pressed her headphones tighter against her ears as the static-filled transmission crackled through the emergency frequency at Nellis Air Force Base. The voice on the other end was barely audible, broken by interference and what sounded like distant screaming. "This is Canadian Forces Base, Cold Lake, requesting immediate evacuation assistance. The infected have, God help us, they're climbing the fence." The transmission cut to static, then silence. Sarah stared at the radio equipment in the dimly lit communications bunker, her heart racing as she tried to raise the Canadian base again. Nothing. Just the endless hiss of dead air. 3 weeks had passed since the first reports of the infection spread across the Northern Territories. What started as isolated incidents in remote Arctic research stations had exploded into a full-scale crisis that government officials were still calling a containment situation, in their sanitized press briefings. But Sarah knew better. The pilots returning from reconnaissance missions spoke in hushed tones about entire towns gone dark, about highways clogged with abandoned vehicles, and about things that moved in ways that defied human nature. The infected, as they were officially designated, displayed an aggressive behavior pattern unlike anything in medical literature. They retained enough motor function to run, climb, and coordinate in groups, but showed no response to pain, fear, or self-preservation instincts. Colonel Marcus Webb burst through the bunker door, his weathered face grim as he approached Sarah's station. "Chin, tell me you've got something more than the usual dead air from up north." His voice carried the weight of a man who'd seen too much combat in his 30-year career, but even he seemed shaken by the reports filtering down from the Canadian border. Sarah rewound the recording and played back the transmission, watching as Webb's expression darkened with each broken word. The colonel had been pushing for military intervention since the crisis began, but Washington remained committed to letting civilian authorities and the CDC handle what they insisted was a medical emergency rather than a military threat. "Sir, this is the 4th Canadian military installation that's gone silent in the past week," Sarah reported, pulling up the communication logs on her screen. "Fort McMurray, CFB Bagotville, CFB Valcartia, and now Cold Lake. These aren't civilian populations we're talking about. These are trained military personnel with weapons, fortifications, and protocols. If they can't hold their positions." She let the implication hang in the air. Webb nodded grimly, understanding that if military bases were falling, the situation was far worse than anyone in Washington wanted to admit. The colonel moved to the large tactical display showing the North American continent, where red zones marked confirmed outbreak areas and yellow zones indicated lost communications. The pattern was unmistakable, a steady southward progression that seemed to accelerate with each passing day. "The Joint Chiefs are meeting in an hour," Webb said, his finger tracing the advancing red zones. "I need concrete intelligence to present, not speculation. Can you establish contact with anyone north of the 49th parallel?" Sarah had been trying for hours, cycling through military frequencies, emergency channels, and even civilian radio bands. The silence from the north was nearly complete, broken only by automated distress beacons and the occasional burst of panic chatter that cut off mid-sentence. As if summoned by their conversation, the radio crackled to life again. This time the voice was clearer, tinged with desperation and exhaustion. Any station, this is Lieutenant Colonel Amy Rodriguez, 142nd Fighter Wing, Canadian Air Force. We're airborne in 2 CF-18s, approximately 50 miles south of Edmonton. Our base has been overrun. Repeat, CFB Cold Lake has fallen. The infected broke through our perimeter at 0347 hours. We're low on fuel and requesting permission to land at any friendly airfield. We have critical intelligence about the infection spread pattern and capabilities. Please respond." Sarah grabbed her microphone with trembling hands. "Aircraft calling for assistance. This is Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. We copy your transmission, Colonel Rodriguez. Stand by for landing instructions." She looked at Webb, who was already reaching for the secure phone to alert base command. As Sarah coordinated the emergency landing, she couldn't shake the image of trained soldiers being overwhelmed by an enemy that felt no pain and showed no mercy. The thought sent chills down her spine as she realized that the war everyone feared was coming might have already begun, and humanity's first line of defense was crumbling faster than anyone could have imagined. The CF-18 fighter jets touched down on Nellis Air Force Base's main runway with their fuel gauges reading empty, their Canadian maple leaf insignias barely visible under layers of soot and what looked like impact marks from debris. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Rodriguez climbed down from the lead aircraft on unsteady legs, her flight suit torn and her face bearing the 1,000-yard stare that Sarah Chin recognized from pilots who'd seen too much combat. Behind her, Captain James Mitchell emerged from the second jet, clutching a ruggedized tablet computer against his chest like a lifeline. Colonel Webb approached the pair with base medical personnel in tow, but Rodriguez waved off the medics with a sharp gesture that spoke of military discipline overriding physical exhaustion. "Colonel Webb, I presume," Rodriguez said, her voice hoarse but steady. "We need to talk immediately. What I have to show you changes everything." She gestured to Mitchell, who activated the tablet with trembling fingers. The screen flickered to life, displaying aerial reconnaissance footage that made everyone present fall silent. The video showed CFB Cold Lake from a bird's-eye view, but instead of the orderly military installation it should have been, the base looked like a war zone. Barracks buildings had been torn apart from the inside, vehicles were overturned and scattered, and the perimeter fence had been breached in a dozen places. But what made Sarah's blood run cold was the movement visible throughout the base, hundreds of figures moving with unnatural coordination, not the random wandering that early reports had described. "This footage was taken 6 hours before our base fell," Rodriguez explained, her finger pointing to specific areas on the screen. "Watch the infected carefully. They're not just mindless creatures stumbling around. Look at how they move in groups, how they systematically search each building, how they coordinate their attacks on our defensive positions." The video showed clusters of infected individuals working together to overcome obstacles, some boosting others over barriers while others distracted defenders. It was tactical behavior that defied every briefing the Americans had received about the nature of the crisis. Mitchell advanced the footage to a particularly disturbing sequence showing the final moments of the base's defense. "Here at 0330 hours, we see them adapting to our tactics in real time," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We had machine gun nests positioned at these choke points, standard defensive protocol. But watch what happens." The video showed the infected approaching the first defensive position in the expected human wave, only to be cut down by automatic weapons fire. But instead of continuing the frontal assault, the remaining infected pulled back and began approaching from different angles, using the base's own structures for cover. Within minutes, they had flanked the defensive positions and overwhelmed the defenders through coordinated attacks from multiple directions. "How long did your base hold out?" Webb asked, though his tone suggested he already feared the answer. Rodriguez checked her watch with a grim expression. "From initial perimeter breach to complete overrun? 43 minutes. Colonel, we had 260 trained personnel, full ammunition stores, prepared defensive positions and advance warning. We'd been monitoring the situation for weeks and had our protocols ready. It didn't matter. They adapted faster than we could respond." Sarah leaned forward to get a better look at the tablet screen. "Colonel Rodriguez, you mentioned this was reconnaissance footage. Were you conducting surveillance of other locations?" Mitchell nodded and pulled up additional files, showing aerial views of Edmonton, Calgary, and several smaller communities. The pattern was unmistakable. Every population center showed signs of the same coordinated behavior, with the infected moving in organized groups toward specific objectives rather than wandering aimlessly. "The infection isn't just spreading randomly," Rodriguez continued, her voice gaining strength as she shifted into briefing mode. "It's spreading strategically. They're targeting communication centers, transportation hubs, and military installations first. It's as if they understand the importance of disrupting our ability to coordinate a response." She pulled up a map showing the progression of infected zones over the past week. "Look at this pattern. They're not just following population densities or geographical features. They're following strategic logic." Webb studied the map with growing alarm. "Are you telling me these things are capable of strategic planning?" Rodriguez and Mitchell exchanged a look before the colonel answered. "Sir, I'm telling you that whatever we're fighting, it's learning. And it's teaching others. Every engagement makes them more effective. We've been treating this as a medical crisis or a natural disaster, but what we're actually facing is an intelligent enemy that's getting smarter with every encounter." The implications of this revelation hit everyone in the room simultaneously. If the infected were capable of learning and coordinating, then every standard military doctrine for dealing with civilian unrest or natural disasters was useless. This wasn't a crisis that could be contained with checkpoints and quarantine zones. This was warfare against an enemy that could adapt, plan, and execute complex strategies. Webb reached for his secure communication device, knowing that Washington needed to hear this intelligence immediately, even if it meant ending his career for bringing foreign military personnel onto American soil without authorization. Colonel Webb stood in the secure briefing room at 0200 hours, facing 12 of his most experienced pilots from the 414th Fighter Squadron. The room was thick with tension as he outlined a mission that could end all their careers, or save countless lives. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room," Webb began, his voice carrying the weight of command decisions that had kept him awake for the past 72 hours. "Washington has classified the northern situation as a humanitarian crisis under civilian authority. They've explicitly ordered no military reconnaissance beyond the 49th parallel." He paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "I'm asking you to disobey those orders." Major Lisa Torres, the squadron's second-in-command, shifted in her seat. "Sir, with respect, what's changed since yesterday's briefing?" Webb activated the wall display, showing the reconnaissance footage Rodriguez had brought from Cold Lake. The pilots watched in stunned silence as the images revealed coordinated attacks and tactical behavior that contradicted every official briefing they'd received. "This changes everything, Torres. We're not dealing with a medical emergency or civil unrest. We're looking at an intelligent enemy that's systematically dismantling our northern defenses." Captain Rick Hawk Harrison, a veteran of 3 combat deployments, leaned forward. "Colonel, if they can coordinate attacks like this, what's their endgame? Are they just expanding territory or is there something more?" Webb pulled up a strategic map showing the infected zone's progression patterns. "Intelligence suggests they're targeting specific infrastructure, communication hubs, transportation networks, and military installations. If this pattern continues, they'll reach major population centers within days, not weeks." The pilots exchanged glances, understanding the implications. Lieutenant Jessica Phoenix Martinez, the youngest member of the squadron, raised her hand. "Sir, what exactly are you asking us to do?" Webb's expression hardened as he outlined the unauthorized mission. "Reconnaissance in force. We fly north in 2 flights, F-35s for close air support and intelligence gathering, F-16s for escort and combat air patrol. Our objective is to establish the true scope of the infected zones and identify any defensive positions that might still be holding out." Major Torres studied the mission parameters on her tablet. "Colonel, this is a significant deployment. We're talking about fuel requirements, weapons loadout, and potential search and rescue operations. How do we justify this to command when they discover we've crossed into Canadian airspace?" Webb had already considered this problem extensively. Official mission logs will show extended training exercises over Nevada airspace. All aircraft will maintain radio silence on standard frequencies and communicate only on encrypted tactical channels. If anyone asks, we're conducting extended range navigation training. The briefing continued with detailed flight plans and contingency procedures. Each pilot would carry emergency survival gear and encrypted communication devices that couldn't be traced to official channels. The F-35s would be equipped with advanced reconnaissance pods capable of real-time intelligence gathering, while the F-16s would carry a full air-to-air loadout in case they encountered any unexpected threats. "What about rules of engagement?" Captain Harrison asked. "Are we cleared to engage the infected if we encounter them?" Webb's answer reflected the complexity of their situation. "Officially, we're not supposed to be there, so we can't engage anything. Unofficially, if you encounter survivors under attack, use your best judgment. But remember, every action we take creates evidence of our presence. We need intelligence, not headlines." He emphasized that their primary mission was reconnaissance and intelligence gathering, with combat operations only as a last resort to protect human life. As the pilots prepared for the mission, Webb pulled Torres aside for a private conversation. "Lisa, I need you to understand something. If this goes wrong, I take full responsibility. Your records will show you were following direct orders from a superior officer. But if we discover what I think we're going to discover up there, careers won't matter anymore." Torres nodded grimly, understanding that Webb was risking everything on his conviction that the official response was inadequate. The squadron launched at 0430 hours under cover of darkness, their aircraft configured for extended range operations. As they flew north through the pre-dawn sky, each pilot was acutely aware that they were crossing into territory where the normal rules of engagement no longer applied. The radio chatter was minimal and professional, but the tension was palpable as they approached the Canadian border. "Phoenix Flight, this is Falcon Leader." Webb's voice crackled over the encrypted channel as they crossed into infected territory. "Remember, we're here to observe and report. What we see up here determines how humanity responds to this crisis." Below them, the Canadian wilderness stretched endlessly, but even from their high altitude, signs of the infection spread were visible: smoke plumes from burning communities, abandoned highways, and the eerie absence of normal nighttime lighting from towns that should have been bustling with activity. As they approached their first reconnaissance waypoint, the pilots prepared themselves for whatever horrors awaited Discovery, knowing that their unauthorized mission might be humanity's last chance to understand the true nature of the threat advancing from the north. The warning lights in Major Torres' F-35 cockpit began flashing red as her engine temperature spiked beyond acceptable limits, forcing her to make the call no pilot ever wants to make. Falcon Leader, Phoenix 2 experiencing catastrophic engine failure. I'm losing power and altitude rapidly. Her voice remained steady despite the aircraft shuddering around her as she fought to maintain control. Below, the Canadian wilderness stretched endlessly, but what should have been empty forest was dotted with signs of the infected presence, abandoned vehicles, destroyed structures, and the ominous sight of coordinated movement along what used to be Highway 63. Phoenix 2, this is Falcon Leader, Webb's voice crackled over the radio. Nearest suitable landing zone is a stretch of Highway 881, approximately 12 miles northeast of your position. Emergency services are negative in that area. You'll be on your own until we can coordinate extraction. Torres acknowledged the instruction while running through emergency landing procedures, knowing that touchdown in infected territory meant survival depended entirely on her training and whatever resources she could salvage from the aircraft. Captain Martinez, flying wingman position, immediately requested permission to provide close air support. Falcon Leader, Phoenix 1 requesting permission to remain on station and provide overwatch for downed pilot. Webb approved the request, understanding that leaving Torres completely alone would be a death sentence. As Torres executed her emergency landing on the abandoned highway, Martinez circled overhead, using her aircraft's advanced sensors to monitor the surrounding area for any signs of infected movement. The F-35 touched down hard on the cracked asphalt, its landing gear absorbing the impact as Torres brought the damaged aircraft to a controlled stop. She quickly ran through the emergency shutdown checklist, gathering her survival gear and emergency radio while scanning the tree line for any signs of movement. The silence was unnerving, no bird calls, no insect sounds, just the ticking of cooling metal from her aircraft's engine. Phoenix 1, this is Phoenix 2 on the ground. Aircraft is secure, no immediate threats visible, but something's wrong with this place. It's too quiet. Martinez's voice came through the radio with concern. Phoenix 2, I'm seeing thermal signatures approximately 2 clicks north of your position. Multiple contacts moving in formation toward your location. Estimated time to contact is 15 minutes. Torres felt her heart rate spike as she gathered her gear and moved away from the aircraft, knowing that the F-35 would draw attention like a beacon. She needed to find cover and establish a defensive position before the infected arrived. Moving through the dense forest, Torres discovered she wasn't alone in the wilderness. A faint whistle echoed through the trees, not the random sound of wind, but a deliberate signal. Following the sound, she encountered a small group of survivors led by a Canadian Forest Service ranger named David Mackenzie. American military? Mackenzie asked, noting her flight suit and equipment. Thank God. We've been surviving out here for 2 weeks, but we're running out of options. Mackenzie's group consisted of 6 civilians who had escaped from Fort McMurray when the infection overran the city. They had learned to survive by staying mobile, avoiding roads, and using the forest canopy to mask their thermal signatures from the infected. They hunt differently than what your media reports suggest, Mackenzie explained as they moved toward a concealed shelter. During daylight they're sluggish and reactive. But at night they become coordinated and aggressive. We've observed them setting up ambush positions and using pack tactics. Phoenix 2, this is Phoenix 1, Martinez's voice crackled over the radio. Thermal contacts have changed direction and are now moving directly toward your last known position. I count at least 40 individuals, and they're moving faster than previous intelligence suggested. Torres relayed this information to Mackenzie, who immediately began breaking down their temporary shelter. They've detected something. Either your aircraft or your radio transmissions. We need to move now. As the group prepared to relocate deeper into the forest, Torres maintained contact with the circling aircraft above. Phoenix 1, can you provide precise coordinates for a potential extraction zone? We have civilian survivors who need immediate evacuation. Martinez began scanning for suitable landing zones while coordinating with Webb's command aircraft to arrange helicopter extraction. Phoenix 2, this is Falcon Leader, Webb's voice carried both relief and concern. We're coordinating with search and rescue assets, but extraction won't be possible until dawn. Can you and the survivors maintain position until first light? Torres looked at Mackenzie and his exhausted group, understanding that another night in infected territory would test everyone's limits. Falcon Leader will hold position. But we're going to need close air support if the infected locate our position. The sun was setting, and Torres knew the real test of survival was just beginning. With Martinez maintaining overwatch from above and Mackenzie's group providing local knowledge, they prepared for what could be their last night alive. The forest around them was coming alive with sounds that no longer belonged to nature, and Torres realized that being behind enemy lines meant facing an enemy that never slept, never tired, and never gave up the hunt. The pre-dawn darkness erupted in coordinated chaos as Torres and Mackenzie's group found themselves surrounded by infected who had learned to hunt in sophisticated pack formations. What should have been a random encounter became a tactical nightmare when the infected demonstrated they had adapted to overcome the survivors' previous escape methods. Phoenix 1, this is Phoenix 2, Torres whispered into her radio as she watched the infected systematically cut off each potential escape route. They're not just tracking us, they're herding us into a kill zone. Captain Martinez, circling overhead in her F-35, watched through thermal imaging as the infected moved with military precision. Phoenix 2, I'm seeing coordinated movement patterns down there. They've got you surrounded, but they're maintaining specific distances from each other, like they're following tactical spacing protocols. The realization sent chills through both pilots. The infected weren't just cooperating, they were implementing advanced military tactics that suggested learning from their encounters with human defenders. Mackenzie signaled the group to take defensive positions among the rocky outcropping they'd chosen as their overnight shelter. They've done this before, he whispered to Torres. 3 weeks ago, they used the same pincer movement to trap a group of survivors near Lac La Biche. We found the aftermath, they're learning from each encounter and teaching the others. Torres checked her sidearm and emergency flares, knowing that conventional small arms fire would be largely ineffective against the numbers they faced. Phoenix 1, can you provide close air support without compromising extraction operations? Torres asked, calculating their dwindling options. Martinez had been considering the same tactical problem. Her F-35 carried a limited air-to-ground ordnance load, and any engagement would announce their presence to infected groups across a wide area. But leaving the ground team to face coordinated assault wasn't an option. Phoenix 2, I'm going to try something unconventional, Martinez announced. The infected seem to coordinate through some form of communication we don't understand yet. What if we disrupt their coordination pattern? She began executing low-altitude passes, using her aircraft's sonic signature to create confusion among the approaching infected. The strategy worked initially. The infected groups hesitated and began moving more erratically as the jet noise interfered with their ability to coordinate. Torres seized the opportunity, directing Mackenzie's group toward a gap in the infected perimeter that Martinez had created. But as they moved, the infected demonstrated another disturbing adaptation. Instead of panicking or scattering, they began using the aircraft noise as cover for their own movement, advancing during the loudest moments of each pass. They're adapting in real time, Torres reported with growing alarm. Phoenix 1, they're using your attack runs to mask their approach. Mackenzie led the group through a series of predetermined fallback positions, each designed to buy time while minimizing direct confrontation. His weeks of survival had taught him that the infected were most vulnerable during transition movements when they couldn't maintain their coordination. Major Torres, we need to reach the old logging road about half a mile east. There's a natural choke point there where we can force them into single file. As dawn approached, the infected behavior began shifting again, becoming less coordinated but more aggressive. Martinez noticed the change from her aerial perspective. Phoenix 2 thermal patterns are changing down there. They're becoming more erratic but moving faster. Whatever coordination method they use seems to be less effective in daylight. This intelligence proved crucial as Torres and the survivors fought their way toward the extraction point. The running battle through the forest revealed additional disturbing capabilities. The infected demonstrated they could set simple traps, coordinate flanking maneuvers, and even use basic tools as weapons. But they also showed vulnerabilities. Their coordination broke down over longer distances, and they seemed to struggle with complex three-dimensional thinking when faced with terrain obstacles. Falcon Leader, this is Phoenix 1, Martinez reported to Webb's command aircraft. We need to completely revise our tactical assumptions. The infected are demonstrating learning capabilities that exceed anything in our intelligence reports. They're not just coordinating, they're innovating. Webb's response carried the weight of command decisions that would reshape military strategy. Phoenix 1, document everything. If they can learn and adapt this quickly, our standard containment protocols are useless. The extraction helicopter finally arrived as the infected pressed their final assault on the survivors' position. Torres coordinated the pickup while Martinez provided close air support, but even during the extraction, the infected demonstrated they were learning from this encounter too. They observed the helicopter's approach patterns, the extraction procedures, and the coordination between air and ground forces. As the helicopter lifted off with all survivors aboard, Torres looked down at the infected below and realized they were watching the aircraft's departure with what could only be described as analytical interest. "They're studying us," she reported to Webb. "Every engagement teaches them something new about our capabilities and tactics. Colonel, we're not fighting mindless creatures anymore. We're fighting an enemy that learns faster than we can adapt our strategies." The implications of this discovery would force a complete re-evaluation of humanity's response to the crisis, as military leaders grappled with the reality that their enemy was becoming more sophisticated with each encounter. Colonel Webb stood in the Emergency Command Center at Nellis Air Force Base, surrounded by screens displaying real-time intelligence that painted a nightmare scenario across North America. The infected zones had expanded exponentially in just 72 hours, with major population centers from Seattle to Minneapolis now reporting coordinated attacks that followed the same tactical patterns Torres had witnessed in the Canadian wilderness. "Sir, we're getting reports from NORAD that infected groups are moving in formation toward Denver," Major Chin reported, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Estimated arrival time is 18 hours, and they're using highway systems to maximize their advance speed." The revelation that the infected could learn and adapt had reached the highest levels of government, finally prompting Washington to declassify the crisis and authorize full military response. But Webb knew they were already behind the tactical curve. Every hour of delay had allowed the infected to study human defensive patterns and develop countermeasures that made traditional military doctrine increasingly ineffective. "What's our current air asset status?" Webb asked, knowing that conventional ground forces had proved inadequate against an enemy that felt no fear and learned from every engagement. Torres, still recovering from her ordeal behind enemy lines, approached the command table with intelligence reports that would reshape their entire strategic approach. "Colonel, based on our ground observations and Martinez's aerial reconnaissance, the infected demonstrate distinct behavioral phases tied to population density and available resources. In rural areas, they operate in small, highly coordinated units focused on intelligence gathering. But as they approach urban centers, they begin massing into larger formations that prioritize overwhelming defensive positions through sheer numbers and tactical coordination." The implications were staggering. Webb pulled up satellite imagery showing infected movements toward major cities, noting the strategic positioning that suggested advanced planning capabilities. "They're not just expanding territory randomly. Look at these approach vectors. They're targeting specific infrastructure nodes that would maximize disruption of civilian evacuation efforts." The infected were systematically attacking power grids, communication networks, and transportation hubs in sequences that would isolate urban populations and prevent coordinated military response. Martinez entered the command center with flight gear still strapped to her shoulders, having just returned from another reconnaissance mission over Colorado. "Sir, the situation is deteriorating faster than our models predicted. The infected groups approaching Denver have learned to disperse when they detect incoming aircraft, then regroup once the threat passes. They're also using urban terrain features to mask their thermal signatures, making precision strikes increasingly difficult." She activated a tablet showing thermal imaging from her latest mission. "But we've identified a potential weakness in their coordination system." The footage revealed something unexpected. The infected groups maintained coordination through what appeared to be designated individuals who remained stationary while others moved. These coordination nodes seemed to direct tactical movements and relay information between different groups. "If we can identify and neutralize these coordination points," Martinez explained, "we might be able to disrupt their ability to execute complex maneuvers." Webb studied the tactical implications while coordinating with other military commands across the continent. "Torres, I need you to work with our intelligence analysts to develop targeting protocols for these coordination nodes. Martinez, you'll lead a flight of F-22s equipped with precision munitions to test this strategy against the formations approaching Colorado Springs. The mission would serve as a proof of concept for new tactics that could be implemented across all combat zones." As the pilots prepared for what could be humanity's first effective counter-strategy, reports flooded in from civilian evacuation zones. The infected had begun demonstrating another disturbing capability: They were actively disrupting evacuation efforts by attacking convoy routes and helicopter landing zones with timing that suggested they understood human rescue operations. "Colonel," Shin reported, "we're receiving distress calls from evacuation convoys on Interstate 25. The infected are using coordinated ambush tactics to trap civilian vehicles and choke points." Webb made the difficult decision to split his limited air assets between testing the new tactical approach and providing emergency support for civilian evacuations. Phoenix Squadron will provide close air support for evacuation operations while Falcon Squadron tests the coordination node targeting strategy. "We can't save everyone, but we can't abandon the people counting on us either." The weight of command decisions that would determine who lived and who died pressed heavily on everyone in the room. Torres and Martinez exchanged looks, understanding that they were flying into combat against an enemy that learned from every encounter and adapted faster than military planners could develop new strategies. "Sir," Torres said, "if this coordination node theory is correct, we might have found their weakness. But if we're wrong, we'll be giving them detailed intelligence about our most advanced aircraft and weapons systems." Webb nodded grimly, knowing that humanity was running out of time and options. "Then we better be right. Because if these formations reach major population centers with their current tactical capabilities intact, we'll be fighting a war we can't win." The race against time had begun, with the fate of millions hanging in the balance as air crews prepared for humanity's most crucial test of tactical innovation against an enemy that seemed to evolve with every passing hour. The abandoned Interstate 76 corridor through the Colorado Rockies had become humanity's chosen battlefield, where Colonel Webb coordinated the largest air-ground operation since the invasion began. The narrow mountain passes created natural choke points that would force the infected formations into concentrated targets, while the elevated terrain provided tactical advantages for both air support and the hastily assembled ground forces. "All units, this is Falcon Actual." Webb's voice crackled across multiple command frequencies as he orbited overhead in his modified F-35 command aircraft. "The infected main body is 30 minutes out from Checkpoint Alpha. This is our line in the sand." Major Torres led Phoenix Squadron in the opening phase of humanity's desperate gambit, using precision-guided munitions to target the coordination nodes that Martinez had identified through days of continuous reconnaissance. "Phoenix lead to all aircraft, I have visual contact with primary coordination cluster at grid reference 847 to 293. Multiple stationary targets maintaining communication with advancing formations." Her targeting system locked onto the eerily still figures who seemed to direct the movements of thousands of infected through some form of communication that human science couldn't yet understand. The first strike was devastatingly effective. As Torres missiles eliminated the coordination nodes, the advancing infected formations immediately lost their tactical cohesion, reverting to the chaotic, individual behavior that early intelligence reports had described. "Falcon Actual, this is Phoenix Lead. Coordination node targeting is successful. Enemy formations are breaking apart into smaller, uncoordinated groups." The success sent waves of cautious optimism through the combined forces, but Torres knew the infected would adapt to this new threat just as they had adapted to everything else. Captain Martinez, leading Falcon Squadron's F-22 Raptors, provided high-altitude overwatch as ground forces moved into position along the mountain corridor. Army Rangers and National Guard units had been positioned at strategic points to channel the infected into kill zones where air support could be most effective. "Falcon Actual, this is Falcon 2. I'm tracking approximately 15,000 infected advancing through the primary corridor. Without coordination, they're moving in predictable patterns along the highway infrastructure." The battle plan required split-second timing and coordination between multiple air wings and ground forces. As the disorganized infected masses poured through the mountain passes, Apache helicopters provided close air support while A-10 Thunderbolts delivered devastating strafing runs against the densest concentrations. For the first time since the crisis began, human forces were achieving tactical superiority against the infected threat. But the victory proved temporary. As the battle progressed, Torres observed a disturbing development. "Falcon Actual, Phoenix Lead reporting new coordination nodes emerging from within the infected masses. They're adapting to our targeting strategy in real time." The infected had learned to hide their coordination elements within the general population and were rapidly establishing new command structures to replace those that had been destroyed. Webb coordinated the evolving tactical situation while maintaining communication with emergency evacuation centers throughout Colorado. "All ground units, be advised the enemy is re-establishing coordination capabilities. Prepare for renewed tactical behavior from infected formations." The warning came just in time as the infected began demonstrating their learned ability to use terrain features and abandoned vehicles for cover, turning the highway corridor into a complex urban warfare environment. The most critical moment came when a massive formation of infected broke through the primary defensive line and began advancing toward the evacuation center at Denver International Airport. Torres and Martinez led a desperate air assault to buy time for the final civilian transports to escape. Phoenix and Falcon squadrons, this is Falcon Actual. We need to hold this position for 20 more minutes while the last evacuation flights clear the airport. Everything we've got, everything we are, goes into this fight. The aerial engagement pushed both pilots and aircraft to their absolute limits. With ammunition running low and fuel reserves critical, the aircrews coordinated with ground artillery to create a devastating barrage that finally stopped the infected advance just miles from the evacuation center. Falcon Actual, this is Phoenix Lead. Enemy advance has been halted, but we're looking at total mission fuel. All aircraft need immediate recovery to alternate airfields. As the immediate crisis subsided, Torres surveyed the battlefield from her cockpit and realized the true scope of what they had accomplished. The infected formations had been stopped, but at enormous cost in personnel, equipment, and resources. More importantly, the enemy had demonstrated once again their ability to adapt and overcome human tactical innovations. Falcon Actual, this is Phoenix Lead. Immediate threat is neutralized, but the infected are already modifying their coordination methods. We've won this battle, but they're learning from it. Webb acknowledged the sobering reality as he coordinated the post-battle assessment. The final gambit had succeeded in protecting the civilian evacuation and proving that the infected could be defeated through tactical innovation. But it had also revealed that humanity was locked in an arms race against an enemy that evolved faster than human military doctrine could adapt. The victory at the Colorado corridor would provide crucial time to develop new strategies, but everyone understood that this was just the beginning of a much longer and more challenging conflict. 3 months after the Colorado corridor battle, Major Torres stood in the newly constructed Strategic Air Command Center buried deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, watching intelligence feeds from across the continent as humanity adapted to a reality no one could have imagined. The infected had retreated to establish what could only be described as territorial boundaries, creating zones where they consolidated their numbers while developing increasingly sophisticated organizational structures. Colonel Webb, the morning intelligence briefing is ready, Torres announced, noting how the crisis had accelerated all their promotions as military leadership adapted to wartime requirements. Colonel Webb, now bearing the insignia of a full bird colonel after his unauthorized mission proved prescient, approached the central display showing a continent divided between human-controlled territories and infected zones. "What's the current assessment of their organizational capabilities?" he asked, though he suspected the answer would be as unsettling as every previous intelligence update. The infected had continued evolving their coordination methods, developing what appeared to be hierarchical command structures that rivaled human military organization in complexity. Captain Martinez, now leading the newly formed infected intelligence squadron, presented the latest reconnaissance findings with professional detachment that couldn't quite mask her underlying concern. "Sir, we're observing construction activities within the infected zones that suggest advanced planning capabilities. They're building defensive fortifications, establishing supply routes, and creating what can only be described as training facilities where they practice coordinated maneuvers." The implications were staggering. The infected weren't just surviving, they were preparing for systematic expansion. The war had evolved far beyond the initial crisis response. Major Sarah Chin, now coordinating communications between scattered human settlements, reported on the establishment of new defensive networks. "We've confirmed contact with 47 survivor enclaves across North America. Each settlement has developed unique defensive strategies based on local terrain and resources. The infected seem to recognize these strongholds but haven't attempted systematic assaults in the past 6 weeks." The pause in aggressive expansion had allowed humanity to consolidate surviving populations and establish communication networks, but everyone understood it was temporary. Webb reviewed casualty reports and resource assessments that painted a sobering picture of humanity's new reality. Military forces had been reduced by 60%, civilian populations had been decimated in the initial outbreak zones, and industrial capacity had been severely compromised. Yet human ingenuity had responded with remarkable adaptability. "Major Torres, what's the status of the new tactical development program?" Webb asked, referring to the crash course in adaptive warfare that military academies were now teaching. Torres outlined the revolutionary changes in military doctrine that the infected crisis had necessitated. We've completely restructured pilot training to emphasize real-time tactical adaptation and multi-domain coordination. The infected have taught us that static defensive strategies are obsolete. Every engagement now assumes the enemy will modify their tactics based on observed results. The military was essentially learning to fight a learning enemy, creating a feedback loop of tactical evolution that pushed human strategic thinking to its limits. The most significant development had been the establishment of the Continental Defense Initiative, a joint civilian-military organization that coordinated resources across the remaining human territories. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, the Canadian pilot whose desperate transmission had started everything, now served as the initiative's northern sector commander. Colonel Webb, we're seeing increased infected activity along the Canadian border zones. They appear to be testing our response times and defensive capabilities in what looks like systematic probing operations. Webb studied the tactical displays showing infected movement patterns that had grown increasingly sophisticated over the months. Where once they had moved in chaotic swarms, they now demonstrated patrol schedules, reconnaissance missions, and coordinated intelligence gathering that suggested military-level strategic planning. They're not just adapting to our tactics anymore, Webb observed. They're developing their own strategic doctrine. The original radio transmission from CFB Cold Lake had become the foundation for humanity's new approach to survival. The fading signal that Major Chin had intercepted 3 months ago now served as a reminder that preparation and rapid response could mean the difference between extinction and adaptation. Major Chin, initiate Protocol 7, Webb ordered, referring to the comprehensive early warning system that monitored infected zones for signs of renewed expansion. As the intelligence briefing concluded, Torres reflected on how drastically their world had changed. The signal from the north had led to humanity's boldest stand, but it had also revealed that their enemy was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The infected continued to evolve, learn, and organize, turning what had initially appeared to be a crisis into a permanent state of warfare between two intelligent species competing for control of the continent. Webb addressed his staff with the grim determination that had carried them through the darkest moments of the crisis. The infected have forced us to evolve or face extinction. We've proven we can adapt, innovate, and survive. But this is no longer about containing an outbreak or managing a crisis. This is about waging a war against an enemy that learns as fast as we do. The signal from the north warned us of their coming. Now we prepare for what comes next. Outside the mountain facility, dawn broke over a world forever changed, where humanity had learned that survival required constant evolution in the face of an enemy that would never stop adapting.